Hi, this is Jack Canfield, and welcome back to another episode of Talking About Success. My guest today is Robert Staub, known as Dusty to his friends. We'll maybe talk about why you're called Dusty. I like that story. And he's both a consultant, he is an author, he's a keynote speaker, and he's a coach. Talked about his 4 books here. I'm going to read them to you. The Heart of Leadership, The 7 Acts of Courage, Dynamic Focus, and his latest book, Courage in the Valley of Death, Daily Practices for Wholehearted Living. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But let me start by asking you, you've worked as an organizational consultant for 30 years.
Yes, sir.
And you think there's a secret to leadership success that most people don't know about.
Absolutely.
What is that?
Absolutely. I think the secret that people miss. Now, I've worked with executives in Fortune 20 companies. I've worked with organizations with startups. And the thing that people miss is where every CEO goes wrong, where every team goes wrong, is a lack of emotional strength. And by that, Jack, I mean they lack the courage to either confront an issue or the courage to be confronted by issues. Mm-hmm. There are other acts, but those are the 2 big ones. And then the next one is the courage to be vulnerable. Not being able to raise your hand and say, I need some help, I don't understand. And those 3 lacks of courage have led to more failures and more organizational disasters than you could imagine.
Now, you've written a book about courage. Let's talk about that for a minute. Let's actually show the viewers 7 Acts of Courage.
Right.
So you're talking about some of the stuff that you wrote about in this book, I take it.
Yes, sir.
And talk about courage in the workplace. Like, give me an example of courage in what you've seen or what you've been able to facilitate happening as a result.
Well, I'll give you an
courage.
example of a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar business. Mm-hmm. And he came through, he got some 360 feedback, and he was very offended. He got great marks on competency, great marks on his ability to connect and relate, great marks on his passion and drive, but he got really low marks on integrity. And he was furious. And I said, what are you upset about? He said, they're telling me I don't have any integrity. I said, well, if you look at it, they're telling you that you get defensive when they give you critical feedback. No, that's not true. I said, that's defensive. He said, no, it's not. So we went back and forth. That's defensive. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. He finally admitted he was defensive, and he started laughing about 20 minutes into it. And he said, I'm really a defensive son of a gun. I said, yes, you are. And I said, given your smarts, given your intimacy, ability to relate, your passion, this takes away value. I said, now think about this. When you try to give feedback to someone and they get defensive and don't listen, do you respect them more or less? He said, less. I said, so when someone tries to give you feedback and you don't listen, do they respect you more or less? And he went, less. I said, you want to be respected more or less? He said, I want to be respected more. I said, then you're going to need to listen non-defensively, and you got to go out and ask people to tell you stuff that's going to hurt your feelings and say, thank you, tell me more. Mm-hmm. And that was a big breakthrough for him.
Very good. Give me another example.
Well, another example was an issue of a CEO who had a buddy who'd been working with him for 15 years in the business, and the business had outgrown this individual. And there were all kinds of issues coming up through the organization. But this CEO didn't have the courage to be confronted with the bad news. He then lacked the courage to confront the individual. So he carried the individual. And then there was a major failure, and the board asked for the CEO's resignation because he failed to confront the individual. People think that CEOs have this big ego and they're willing to confront everybody. They have relationships just like we do, and they get loyal and they get attached, and sometimes they have trouble delivering the tough news, and they try to carry someone, and you can't do that.
Mm-hmm. So if I wanted to have more courage, or people listening, what would you suggest I or we do?
Well, I would say, first of all, everybody's got courage, or they wouldn't be here.
That's true.
So I think there's 7 distinct acts of courage. And so if you look at it, we say, well, do you have the courage to dream and express that dream? Some people don't. They will say, I'm just working, I'm getting through, but they won't put it out there. I've seen a lot of young people, and I've seen a lot of older people who are afraid of being criticized, that they might fall flat. Mm-hmm. The courage to dream is like Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. saying, I have a dream someday all God's children, black children, white children, Jews and Gentiles, will come together at the table of brotherhood. Or JFK, in this decade, we'll put a man on the moon and return him again safely. So it takes boldness. Proverbs says, without a vision, the people perish. So that's a very important piece. But it's not enough to have the courage to dream. You've got to have the courage to see current reality, to own your strengths. I see a lot of people afraid of that because that means they might have to do something. Or the courage to see where they're weak and where they've got to borrow strengths from somebody else. So there's 5 other acts. I could go through them all, but I help executives, I help teams and organizations assess where they're strong, how to leverage those, and the 1 or 2 acts they've least developed. Because it's that one act of courage that you're weakest in, that is your Achilles heel. That's where you're going to stumble. It's going to trip you up every time. And the biggest cause of failure, Ram Charan did an interview at Fortune magazine back in 1999 called Why CEOs Fail. It was the cover article. His conclusion was it was a lack of emotional strength. Primarily, they lack the courage to either confront or the courage to be confronted. But I think there's other acts that create issues.
Now, you've written a couple of other books. I want to just talk about those for a minute, if you would.
Sure.
This is called The Heart of Leadership.
That was my first book.
Yeah, just talk about it for a moment. What's in here?
That book is a distillation of about 5.5 years of research and having worked with 1,500 executives and 10 CEOs, including Admiral Tom Brooks, who was the retired Director of Naval Intelligence, 27,000 people reporting up the chain of command to him. And in interviewing these 15 CEOs, looking at these organizations, about 500 books on leadership, I couldn't find anybody talking about a holistic framework of leadership. So what my book does, that I haven't found anything else. I think I'm the world's foremost expert on wholehearted leadership right now. And it's about how to put together a holistic framework that has 7 core dimensions that make you powerful. And the first is remembering why you're here. The soul of your business, the soul of who you are as an individual and leader is your core purpose. And then the vision of where you want to go, how it's going to live over a period of time. And then courage, the big ones. Because without courage, you won't be faithful to your purpose and you won't achieve your vision. But then the living heart of how you get there is assessing your competencies, where you're competent or not. Integrity, can I trust you? Will you follow through? Intimacy, how friendly are you? How accessible? How approachable are you? And finally, passion. Do you show passion and commitment, and do you liberate the passion of other people? There are practices to develop that. There are practices if you know who you be, if you know why you're here, if you know where you want to go, and if you have the guts and the heart to go after it.
I'm going to throw one more question at you. This is your newest book, I believe.
Yes, sir.
It's called The Courage in the Valley of Death, Daily Practices for Wholehearted Living. Talk about how this book came to be. I think it's a beautiful story.
That's a tough story.
Well, you can tell it. Have the courage.
I'm the oldest son of an oldest son. My father grew up in the Depression. He was in the Army. He was tough. He thought Patton was a bit of a pansy. And my dad grew up in the Depression. He knew life was tough. Full scholarship to Notre Dame in 1942. Ended up fighting in World War II, going to Korea, 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne, 500 career jumps. My father believed wholeheartedly in spare the rod, spoil the child. So there was a lot of physical, emotional, and verbal punishment. My father never said, I love you. He never gave approval, because whatever you did wasn't quite good enough, because the world was a tough place. I grew up with a lot of fear. We moved 10 times. First 10 years of schooling, I was a minority. In England, I was that damn Yank. In Texas, I was that damn gringo. I was always that damn Army brat, because we lived off base. I got beat up a lot. I was terrified of my father. I was terrified of this new school. I was terrified. I knew I was going to get beat up. And if I went back home and my father didn't realize I'd been beaten up, I'd get punished and whipped and go told back and whip that. I wasn't a warrior, Jack. I was a lover and intellectual. And my father saw me as inadequate. And I began to believe increasingly I was inadequate. A lot of terror, a lot of fear. Then in 5th grade, something happened. The bully who'd beaten me up, taken me down, one day picked on my little sister. She was 2 years younger than me. He went and pushed her down, and something snapped. I tackled him. I beat him. He started crying, was bleeding, and he got up. He never bothered her again or me. It was the last time I was bullied. Fast forward about 17 years. I'm in the VA hospital. I'm standing on the bedside of a VA veteran who had fought in World War II, his wife and daughter. He's dying of esophageal cancer. The duty nurse is on the other side. He's in a coma. I've been working with him for 2 months. He's been unconscious now for a week. They're holding his hands, and the nurse is saying, tell him everything. Don't hold anything back. He can hear you. And they're pouring out their love, and they're pouring out their gratitude. And tears are running down my face because that would not be with me with my dad. And I saw the nurse crying, and he breathed out. That was it. And after a while, they were led away. And I just stood there, and a bolt of lightning went through me. And I realized at some point, everything I knew, everything I would have, everything I would learn would be stripped away at the moment of death. And that's when I started to grow up. I made a commitment. And over the next year, I changed my relationship with my father. Instead of blaming him and being angry and complaining about him with my 5 brothers and sisters, all my male friends were mad at their dads, I realized my dad, in one corner, 225 pounds, fist up, in this corner of the universe. My father was taking on the universe. He was a warrior, and he thought he could win. And I just realized he was doing the best he knew how to do. So I made a commitment. I'm going to treat him with love and respect, no matter how he treats me. So at his graveside, there was no grief, no regret, no shame. I began to do that. It took time, took 9 months of effort. And he didn't make it easy. I'd say, I didn't want to yell. He'd be yelling. I'd lose my temper. And I'd say, I want to apologize. I ain't going to accept your damn apology, he said. So I'd walk around the golf course, calm down. I'd come back, sorry, Dad, I had to calm down. Where'd you go, you damn coward? Excuse me. Walk around the golf course again. I got a lot of exercise. But at the end of 9 months, I was able to tell him I loved him, express my appreciation, and just see that he was doing the best he could, a man who grew up in a very tough time. And the funny thing was, in month 12, 13, so I was walking out one day and my father says, I love you. And I said, what'd you say, Colonel? He said, you get out of here. I said, you just told me you love me. I'm going to kick your tail. I said, you love my tail. And after that, my dad was one of my greatest friends, greatest advocates, greatest champions. He became the dad I always wanted. And so from age 32 to age 42, for 10 years, I had the greatest dad in the world because I became the man I was meant to be. And transforming myself, it helped transform my dad.
And I think what's beautiful about this story, I want to tie it back into what we started with you as a leadership consultant and a trainer and coach and all that, is that it's possible for us to transform. And as we transform, everything around us transforms.
Yes.
And you are really helping leaders become the full human potential that they are and step into being fully functioning human beings. Whether it's, you mentioned 7 aspects of courage, there's usually 1 or 2 missing, and as we step into that, we become the kind of leader that really can take an organization to the next level. And I know you have a lot of success stories about that because they're in your book and we've talked about them. So unfortunately right now we're running out of time. I asked you that question because I really wanted people to see the humanity that exists behind this competent leader, coach, consultant that you are. So I think that's what's really needed right now. This wholehearted leadership that you talk about is really critical for where we are at this time in history. So thank you for sharing that with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack.
Very
My
much.
pleasure.
Now, if people want to find out more about you, get a hold of you, have them come work with you as a coach or for their organization to help build their team, where do they go?
They just go to our website, www.staubleadership.com.
S-T-A-U-B, leadership.
Leadership as one word.com. There's videos, there's 200 articles, there's the listing of the 4 books, there's lots of information, including information on all the programs and services we offer.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I really encourage you, if you're a leader or want to be a better person, really, get in touch with this man. I interview a lot of people, and if I had to rank one of them, you'd be in the top 2 or 3. So thank you for this.
Thank you, Jack.
I'm enjoying getting to know you. All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back after this message.